The CBC and the Trudeau government are suddenly talking about the idea of a forced vaccine. Every single Canadian needs to fight back against this insane and authoritarian idea. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. So on Friday afternoon, this story suddenly hit the internet and the reaction was absolutely unbelievable. When I read the story, I actually had to read it twice to make sure that I was fully comprehending what it was that they were trying to say, because the headline itself and the immediate reaction was bad. It was bad, and I'm happy to say that it was bad because at least Canadians are starting to see, or at least the Canadians who hang out online, hang out on Twitter, are saying, no, absolutely not. So here's a headline that the CBC put out. It says that provinces could make vaccination mandatory, says Federal Health Minister. Federal Health Minister Jean-Yves says vaccination remains the only way out of the pandemic. Okay, just put this out there. There's a huge distinction between a vaccine that everyone's encouraged to take, a huge difference between that and a vaccine mandate. A vaccine mandate where you cannot participate in certain elements of society. You may lose your job if you don't comply with this forced vaccines. That's already a big gulf, right? And then what we're talking about here is an even bigger gulf, saying that we're now going to talk about the idea of a mandatory vaccine, a forced policy where every Canadian, regardless of their ethics, regardless of their own health, regardless of their religion, anything else, regardless of their conscience, that they would be forced by the federal government or the provincial government, forced by a government to have a vaccine, to inject something into your body. This is insane. This is going way further than anywhere that we've gone and anywhere that we've really seen. This is totally uncharted territory. And the fact that they just sort of casually release this story on a Friday afternoon, unbelievable. Unbelievable. The fact that they're even talking about this should raise unbelievable alarm bells. You should feel so uneasy with the fact that they're even talking about this. And we saw that, the sort of reaction, not just from Canadians, but people all over the world that are sort of watching Canada, wondering, are they about to go down the path that Australia has gone down and just go like completely COVID authoritarian crazy? Well, this story really makes us think that we are headed in that direction. So here is what the health minister says. Here's what the CBC story says. It says, provinces are likely to introduce mandatory vaccine policies in the coming months to deal with the surging COVID-19 caseloads, Health Minister Jean-Yves said today. What we see now is that our healthcare system in Canada is fragile. Our people are tired, and the only way that we know to get through COVID-19, this variant and any future variant, is through vaccination. Okay, that in and of itself is sort of in line with what they've been saying all along. And it's true. Of course, Canada's healthcare system is fragile. It is underfunded. It is chronically mismanaged. It is centrally planned. It's socialism, and socialism doesn't really work. So it's only a matter of time before this thing collapses. And obviously it's being tested and tested and tested. People are tired. That's right. Everyone wants to get out of this stupid pandemic, and people really, really don't like being locked down. And then the government's position, longstanding, that they believe that the only way to get out of COVID is through vaccination. Nothing new there. Says Duclos said that while rapid tests, masking, and social distancing are useful tools, they won't end the pandemic on their own. And then CBC includes this statistic. He says 50% of hospitalizations now in Quebec are due to people not having been vaccinated, he said. Okay, but just right off the bat there. So if 50% of hospitalizations are for people not being vaccinated, so unvaccinated 50%, the obvious counterpoint to that is that 50% of people in the hospital are vaccinated. So just right there, they completely undercut their own point that the only way out of this pandemic is vaccinations, that everyone needs to get vaccinated to protect yourself. It's like, well, your own point about 50% shows that that's just simply not the case. Even if everybody was vaccinated, the hospital, at least half would still be in there. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's wrong. And they undercut their own point right there. He says that's a burden on healthcare workers, a burden on society, which is very difficult to bear and for many people difficult to understand. That's why I'm signaling this is a conversation which I believe provinces and territories in support with the federal government will want to have over the next weeks and months. Duclos said that while discussions about mandatory vaccination policies are not taking place now, he believes that based on his personal understanding of what we see internationally and domestically, and in some of my conversations with health ministers over the past few weeks, the discussion will start in the coming weeks and months. Okay, so the health minister here is first saying that these conversations are not happening right now, that no one's actually talking about mandatory vaccines. However, he's sort of encouraging people to start having those conversations in the next weeks and months. And he's saying, based on his current conversations with health ministers over the past few weeks, they are talking about it or they will talk about it. So sort of muddled ideas here. But basically what they're doing is they're introducing this idea to the public. They're introducing the idea that mandatory vaccines are just sort of the next logical step. So first we introduced these vaccines and we encouraged everyone to voluntarily take them. We tried to create incentives. We tried to encourage them using our own methods of sort of just encouraging the public to do it. That only got us so far. So the next step that we introduced was these vaccine passports and sort of vaccine mandates to fire people and not allow people to access certain areas of society unless not only did they get vaccinated, but they would show you a sort of government-issued piece of verification to prove that they're vaccinated. And then sort of the next logical step will just be, okay, now everyone has to do it. Like, I don't know exactly what it looked like. We're going to go door to door and just like force you to get vaccinated against your will, or they don't spell it out in the story, but they're kind of just like suggesting that this is like the next logical step in this pandemic is, okay, we've exhausted all other areas. Next step is just sort of forced vaccination, which is obviously a totally terrifying idea. And this is kind of how the Overton window gets moved, right? So the very first time that we heard about the idea of a vaccine mandate, it didn't sound right. It sounded like something that was un-Canadian, that wouldn't happen in Canada, something that, a fascist authoritarian government would do, requiring citizens to show their health, to verify certain aspects of their health before being able to access certain parts of society, being able to keep their job, etc. And it was so offside with sort of what Canadians would generally think that almost everyone universally came out against the idea of vaccine mandates. So 1 year ago, we had Prime Minister Justin Trudeau say, no, we're not going to do vaccine mandates. 6 months ago, we had both Premier Ford and Jason Kenney saying, no, they're not going to do vaccine mandates. And yet here we are, in January 2022 with fully rolled out vaccine mandates. It's increasing in certain parts of the country. We had that story out in, I think it was New Brunswick, where you had to have a vaccine to get into a grocery store. Thankfully, that was overturned. But it's here to stay. Even in Ontario, that said it was going to be temporary. They said it was going to be gone by January. Well, it's January. It's still here. So here is a clip showing you how politicians were against vaccine mandates before they were for it.
I think it's an interesting idea, but I think it is also fraught with challenges. We are certainly encouraging and motivating people to get vaccinated as quickly as possible. But we always know there are people who won't get vaccinated and not necessarily through a personal or political choice. There are medical reasons. There are a broad range of reasons why someone might not get vaccinated. And I'm worried about creating knock-on undesirable effects in our community.
What's your position on vaccine passports for those individuals unwilling to be vaccinated?
Opposed. And we've been very clear from the beginning that we will not facilitate or accept vaccine passports, and that in fact we regard, I believe that they would in principle contravene the Health Information Act and also possibly the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. We also amended the Public Health Act to remove the 110-year-old power allowing Alberta to force people to be inoculated. So these folks who are concerned about mandatory vaccines have nothing to be concerned about, and there will be no vaccine passports in Alberta.
Will your government provide an actual card or proof of vaccination? And if not, why not?
Well, I've never believed in proof. Everyone gets their proof when they get the vaccination. You're right. Anything can be fraudulent, right down from money to certifications. I just, no, we aren't doing it. Simple as that. We're just going to move forward. Now, if it's federal, getting across the border, that's up to the federal government. We'll see what they decide to do. I'll be talking to the Prime Minister tonight. But the answer is no. We aren't going to do it. We aren't going to have a split society.
So as you can see, all of these politicians were opposed to the idea of vaccine passports before they inevitably came around. And so a lot of people were worried, like when this CBC story came out and when this Trudeau minister came out saying that mandatory vaccines are coming, we saw a lot of reaction, and thank goodness we saw that. But there's some skepticism about the reaction, particularly from politicians like Jason Kenney, because a lot of people were like, well, wait a minute, you were also really against the idea of vaccine passports before you slowly caved. When the situation changed, the media continued to drum up fear and anxiety about COVID, the cases are on the rise, politicians kind of stuck saying, okay, well, we don't really have a lot of other options given the limitations of our healthcare system. And so a lot of people are kind of worried that we would be heading in the same path, that just like how everyone was opposed to vaccine mandates a year ago or half a year ago, everyone's opposed to this idea of forced vaccines right now, but what will things look like if we continue to get hit by Omicron and all the cases are skyrocketing, or if there's another variant that comes out after Omicron that perhaps is worse, it perhaps spreads as much as Omicron but has a deadlier impact like Delta. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, and so a lot of people are just really uneasy and sort of concerned that this is just going to be the next iteration of the vaccine passports, just like everyone opposed them before, and then slowly everyone came around. Maybe the same thing will happen in this idea of forcing people to get vaccinated will become sort of a normalized idea that Trudeau, again, is just trying to push the Overton window, trying to introduce this now to kind of give us a taste of it, get us talking about it, and then everyone says, no, we don't want it. But slowly over time, this idea will start appealing to more people. More people will start making the case for it, and who knows, maybe 6 months or a year from now, we might be in a position where this is actually something that the government is introducing, which is truly, truly terrifying. Now, I want to get into a bit more about this idea that the pandemic is no longer a pandemic of just the unvaccinated. This is what politicians like to promote, this idea. Certainly the Trudeau government is really fixated on this idea that all we have to do is get everyone vaccinated and we're done. We're out of this thing, right? Like, again, 6 months ago, the idea was that all we have to do is get this vaccine mandate system in place where you have to show that you've been vaccinated in order to enter certain institutions in society, including going to grocery shop in places like New Brunswick. Thankfully, they rolled that back. But even just going out to the movies, going out for dinner, going and participating in society in a normal way, having a job. Many jobs now require the vaccine. We were told that was going to be a way out of the pandemic, but it certainly clearly wasn't, given that we still went into lockdown in Ontario and Quebec despite having these vaccine passport systems in place. But this idea that all we have to do is get everyone vaccinated is wrong. It's wrong on the surface, and I alluded to this already when they said that the health officials in Quebec say that about 50% of COVID hospitalizations right now are of people who are unvaccinated, which the obvious response to that is to say, well, that means 50% are vaccinated, which means that even if everyone was vaccinated, we'd still have lots and lots of hospitalizations. I don't know exactly what percentage, but clearly if people who are vaccinated are still being hospitalized because of COVID, then vaccines aren't the silver bullet. They're not the only way out. And other provinces, the data is even more clear. I showed this on the show last week. These are updated figures, and it's even more stark. So look at this. This is the number of people in the hospital. Now that dark red slice of the pie, or that purple slice of the pie in the top right corner, it's like less than 25% of the people. Those are the unvaccinated cases. Those are the small 1/4 of the pie slice is unvaccinated. 457 cases, less than 25%. The rest of the pie are either fully vaccinated or partially vaccinated. So more than 3/4 of the people in the hospital, but not the ICU, in Ontario right now are vaccinated. They're vaccinated. So the whole point, with this idea that we just have to get everyone vaccinated and we'll be out of the pandemic, is wrong on the surface. The data, the science isn't backing that up. When you look at people in the ICU, more than half of the people in the ICU right now are either fully vaccinated or partially vaccinated. The darker green part here, which looks like it's about 45% of people in the ICU right now, are unvaccinated. And we know this. The vaccine companies have come out themselves and said, look, these vaccines don't necessarily protect you against Omicron, the new variant. It's mutated in a way that it's figured out a way to get around the vaccine and still attack people who are vaccinated. So what a strange time for the Trudeau government to then go and say that all we have to do is get everyone vaccinated and we'll get out of this pandemic, when the stats of the people in the hospital right now in this current wave with Omicron is hitting both sides. It's hitting both the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Now, I want to get into another point here, because the story is sort of hinting towards this idea that it's up to the provinces. It's not federal jurisdiction, but the health minister is saying that this is something that is coming, that the provinces are either talking about or going to be talking about. But then the CBC goes into what the provincial responses have been, and it's the exact opposite of the story. It's the exact opposite. So we hear from 4 provinces in this news story: Quebec, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Nova Scotia. And all 4 of those provinces say no. saying, no, we're not, this is not something that we're doing. This is not happening. We're not talking or going to introduce mandatory vaccines, which again just shows how out of touch both the CBC and the Trudeau government are for trying to bring this conversation up and trying to normalize it. Meanwhile, the whole basis of the story is that this is something the provinces might do. And then when they go and talk to the provinces themselves, the provinces say, no, this is why this story is fake news. It's just the CBC trying to condition us to get ready. This is going to come. So first it says, Quebec, a spokesperson for Quebec's health minister said Friday that mandatory vaccination is not something the province is looking at yet. Jason Kenney likewise came out very strongly on social media, and he said that his government will not make vaccines mandatory. He says, Alberta's legislature removed the power of mandatory vaccination from the Public Health Act last year and will not revisit that decision, period. While we strongly encourage those who are eligible to get vaccinated, it is ultimately a personal choice that the individual must make. So good for him. And this is a strong tweet. This is good. This is what you want to hear from Jason Kenney, the Alberta Conservative Premier. However, as a little side note, as a little footnote, it should be noted that Kenney was also very opposed to the idea of a vaccine mandate before he flip-flopped and introduced that. So I think that's why some people are, taking a hint of caution when it comes to cheerleading for Jason Kenney right now, just because we've seen this before. Likewise, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe issued a statement saying that while he strongly encourages people to get vaccinated, his province will not be implementing a mandatory vaccine policy. And finally, Nova Scotia, their chief medical officer was on CBC radio, and in an interview on Saturday, he addressed this, and he said that the province isn't considering mandatory vaccines, but they are considering increasing the sort of scope of the vaccine passport. So again, CBC making it seem like this is something that people are talking about that's coming, and yet they couldn't even find a single example of someone even entertaining this idea. They found 4 people who said, no way, no way. And so they couldn't find any examples in Canada, so they move on and they sort of hint towards the idea that Europe is heading in this direction. However, they again can't find any examples in Europe of a country actually implementing this policy. They don't. They say that some countries such as Austria and Greece have moved in that direction. Okay, moving in that direction. And the example is that there are some European countries who are implementing fines if you're not vaccinated. But again, a fine for someone who's not vaccinated is not really the same thing as mandatory vaccines. When you hear mandatory vaccines, what do you think? You think of them like going door to door and saying, show us your papers. Are you vaccinated? If not, we're going to force you to do it right now. We're going to arrest you and like force it upon you. And then when they're saying what the actual example is that, okay, in Greece, if you're over the age of 60 and you're not vaccinated, you're now subject to a monthly $100 fine. When I read that, I thought, a lot of people I know who are holdouts who refuse to get vaccinated, don't want to get vaccinated, they would probably take the fine. If you could just pay a fine, if the government said, okay, you're creating a risk to the healthcare system, pay $100 a month as like an extra tax or a fine, and then you can live your life as normal. You don't have to lose your job. You don't have to be restricted from going outside. You don't have to comply to all of these hoops and all of these crazy vaccine policies. I think a lot of people would take it. I think a lot of people would say, okay, I would rather give you $100 a month and have my freedom than the current system that we have now. So again, the CBC is trying to normalize this, trying to say that this is out there and this is coming. But it isn't. It isn't, and Canadians should not be fooled into thinking this is something normal, something that we will accept down the road. This is the kind of policy that Canadians must fight back against and must say no to. So I've got some examples of Canadians doing just that, pushing back against this concept of mandatory vaccines. So Michael Cooper, who is the Conservative MP for St. Albert, Edmonton, he writes this is outrageous. Justin Trudeau's government is entering into truly dangerous authoritarian territory. State-imposed involuntary medical interventions are un-Canadian and have no place in a free and democratic society. This is absolutely right. I couldn't have said it any better myself. And this tweet just emphasizes the seriousness of this story and of this idea. It's not just some stupid harebrained scheme that Trudeau and the CBC are trying to push. Like Michael Cooper says, this is truly dangerous authoritarian territory. And yes, they have no place in a free and democratic society. Likewise, Paul Hinman, who is the leader of the Wild Rose Independence Party of Alberta, writes this: unconstitutional, divisive, and immoral. Wild Rose denounces this mandatory vaccination plan. Jason Kenney must also immediately denounce mandatory COVID vaccines. Well, he did, absolutely. Someone shared this tweet, and I know this isn't scientific, and I don't even know if this was the final outcome of this poll, but CTV had a poll on their website asking, should Alberta introduce a mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policy? And as you can see, 85% said no. I like to interview or talk to one of those 1,700 people, the 15% that said yes, because I don't understand how anyone could be for this policy. Jordan Peterson, likewise, I don't know if he's specifically talking about this story and this idea of a mandatory vaccine, but or if just generally commenting, but this is absolutely right. He says, these mandates bring out the petty authoritarian and everyone tasked with enforcing them, not a good practice in a free society. That's absolutely right. And we have to take stock. We have to pause every now and then, look around us and look at the way that the world is. Look at the things that we've allowed our government to do, the powers that we've given them, and the things that we've just complied with. Again, hoping that it will help our health, hoping that it will help us get out of this pandemic. This is one of those policies that really, really makes you stop and think that we are heading in the wrong direction. We have been heading in the wrong direction for a long, long time. We should have drawn a line a long time ago. Canada continues to creep into unventured territory with regards to the power that the government has over our lives and the types of solutions that they're discussing that are being normalized by institutions like the CBC. This policy right here, the idea of forced vaccines, this is our red line. This must be our red line as a country. We must all stand together in lockstep to say absolutely not. No, there will never be a policy of mandatory vaccines in Canada, period. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show.